Well, very good. Well, thank you all again for joining us today. My name is Stan Myers. I'm president of the KC Downtowners, and we're really happy that you're all here with us today. For those of you who maybe are joining for the first time, welcome. And excuse me, let me tell you a little bit about who the KC Downtowners are. The KC Downtowners is an informal association of people who gather together to network and learn about downtown Kansas City. Excuse me. We promote the Kansas City urban core by making connections, sharing information, and fostering collaboration. Our mission is to continue to be a resource for our community, raise awareness of important issues related to our city, and to include all people in the discussion that will lead to a better tomorrow. And I will say that the folks that we're about to hear from today all fit that description very well. And there's going to be a theme to our speakers today, and that is infrastructure. And given that this is a day when the president is in town to talk about infrastructure, we really beat him to the punch by making that our theme for today. And as we do every month since we have gone virtual, the Downtowners have made a point to highlight a particular nonprofit in lieu of, the past $25 registration to attend an in-person luncheon. We ask all of our people here on the call today to consider making a donation to a particular nonprofit. And the one we're sponsoring today is called Greenworks, Kansas City. And we're grateful to have Kate Corwin, who is president, on to tell us a little bit about that. So Kate, go ahead.
All right, well, thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to see Rick Usher in his sunglasses too. Wow, that was amazing. All right, my name is Kate Corwin. I'm the founder and president of an organization called Greenworks Kansas City. We were founded in 2007. We now serve more than 150 urban 4th through 12th graders each year. And our mission is really to empower our future leaders to care for the environment, contribute to the economy, and help create healthy communities. So we run several out-of-school youth leadership programs that all have the environment connection in some capacity. So we do, for example, nature discovery for 4th through 8th graders. We have service learning projects for high school and middle school that include things like native rain gardens and tree planting and recycling events. We host a summer eco career camp for middle school students. If you may not be aware of this, but middle school is actually the sweet spot when it comes to young youth deciding what type of career they're going to go into. So we hit them at that middle school age. For high school students, we have workforce readiness programming that includes paid internships. So we've done paid internships now for, well, since 2007 when we started, and our internships are aligned with the students' career goals. And finally, we have a sustainable business program that we run that includes a new social enterprise retail store that's called the Perennial Bee. And our retail store is down on 31st Street next to our classroom space. And our students are just having a lot of fun. They're choosing sustainable products for the store. They're actually making some products for the store. They're learning marketing, merchandising, and then customer service when customers come in. And all the proceeds help benefit Greenworks and help us keep our programs going. So I want to just briefly tell you how Olson works with us. I've known Jan Markison for a long time. We live in the same lovely Southmoreland neighborhood, so we see each other periodically too. Olson supports us with monetary contributions, so I want to thank them for that. It's very important. They also, though, serve as a job site visit for our high school students. So we bring our students down to Olson. We tour the office space. The students get to interview some of the associates, associates about what a day in the life of being an Olson employee is like. Also, what their educational background is, how they came to this career, because as we know, we don't all have straight career trajectories. So that's really eye-opening for our young people. And then we tour their space. And then we work together on a project challenge. And a few years ago, one of our challenges was, where would we put bike paths, which was an eye-opening experience for the students, learning all of the infrastructure issues in the hills and the car traffic too. So this year, I believe our challenge is going to be around something that's near and dear to all of our hearts, which is trying to slow down traffic on 31st Street. So if you're ever in the Midtown area and you are familiar with 31st Street, the traffic goes whizzing by. So as I mentioned, we serve 150 students each year. We've arranged and funded 16,000 hours worth of internships. We've planted 4,000 native plants, trees, and shrubs, and all of the high school students who've gone through our program have gone on to graduate from high school. I believe that Kim is going to put our website into the chat box. It's greenworkskc.org. My name is Kate Corwin. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. I appreciate the support and our partnership with Olson Associates. I wish you all happy holidays and stay well. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That's a wonderful story, wonderful organization, and appreciate the partnership that you have with Olson. Our sponsor for the day. Trent Dansel is on the call and is going to tell us a little bit about Olson, an engineering and design firm with strong roots here in the Midwest. And I think you're going to also focus on a very unique aspect of Olson, which is the Olson Studio, which has tremendous historical ties to Kansas City. So Trent, why don't you go ahead and share the story?
Great, thanks, Stan. Stan, can you see my screen here? Give me a thumbs up.
Yes, I see your screen. Thank you.
Tremendous, awesome. Well, thank you. I did want to talk about the Olson Studio today. I'd invite everyone to take a quick screenshot of our logo and my information here. If anyone has questions about the studio after the fact, reach out to me or Jan. Everyone knows Jan. Man, we are just excited to be here today. We're excited to hear from Gunnar. My name is Trent Dansel. I'm a business consultant for Olson, where I have the privilege to work beside Jan. We both sit down in the studio at 18th and Main. And in addition to Jan, there's a host of talented folks down at the studio, a number of whom are on the call today. I saw Cody, Brandon, Aaron, and Taylor. If I'm missing anyone, I apologize. I couldn't check the names right before I started speaking. Glad you're here. One reason we're so excited to host today is because this is the Downtowners. Downtown is important to the Olson Studio. It's important to our legacy. Some of those projects you're going to see here briefly. It's certainly important to our present and our future. I mentioned we have our office downtown. It's just it's a big part of our who we are. And a little bit more about who we are. The Olson Studio was created in 2015 when Olson acquired what was Auctioner Hare & Hare. The Olson Studio is a landscape architecture and planning design studio within Olson. We're rooted in a 100-year legacy, and we are committed to creatively engaging our clients, helping define their visions for landscape design, land planning, community and neighborhood redevelopment, parks and recreation, urban and regional planning, and then taking those visions and turning them into reality. As a company, we offer a full spectrum of services to include engineering, environmental services, technical services, field services, and of course, through the Olson Studio, planning and design services. We provide those services to clients in a number of markets. We've identified 6: energy, government, land and facilities, telecom, transportation, and water. As a firm, we physically occupy the footprint you see in green, but we're prepared and do successfully deliver projects coast to coast. And I want to refocus again on the Olson Studio for just a minute. When I first walked into the studio, I thought, this is a firm that loves Kansas City history. And while that's true, I realized all of the things on our walls were projects we designed, and that's kind of mind-blowing. So just a run of our biggest hits: Loose Park, Swope Park, Nelson Atkins Museum lawn. If you get a card from the Danzel family this year, you'll see that in our background. National World War I Memorial. It's just a host of iconic projects. And as important as those historical projects are to us as a firm and our legacy, we've got a lot in front of us. And downtown, as I said, is a big part of that. Hospital Hill Park is a much more recent example of what we bring to the table. Operation Greenlight. This is an ongoing project with the Mid-America Regional Council to introduce standardization and efficiency and traffic flow and management across city, county, and state lines. One specific example of that is the T-Mobile Sprint Center. We designed an event management signal timing scheme to, again, introduce standardization and efficiency. It was actually so successful, it's the default scheme for signals in the area. It's kind of interesting. Some of you may have seen this one, the Highway 9 to grade study. We worked with the Downtown Council looking at possibilities for lowering Highway 9 to grade through Columbus Park and the River Market to reintroduce the standard grid system and open up some land for redevelopment. Very neat project. Lowe's Hotel, we were involved with the traffic study and some construction period services, inspection, materials testing. The 11th and 12th Street Transit Project, we're working with KCMO and KCATA to improve bus reliability and add some bike facilities on 11th or 12th Street. It's kind of neat, just started, so don't know exactly where that one's going to land yet. And I want to end with this one because it's an example of our legacy and our vision for the future coming together. 18th and Vine Pedestrian Plaza, I saw Michael Gardner with Talaferro and Brown on the call. The Olson Studio is a sub to Talaferro and Brown on this project. We are just so excited to be part of this win with another downtown institution of infrastructure design and can't wait to dig in. So with that, I just want to say again from the Olson Studio, season's greetings. Thanks for being here today. And I'm going to turn it over to Stan.
Trent, thank you so much. We appreciate your sponsorship this month. We appreciate Olson's continuous participation over the years with the downtowners. You mentioned in your comments, two things: legacy and looking forward. And really, when Olson, acquired the former Oxner Hair Studio, that was really an act of historic preservation. And looking back on Kansas City's important legacy in urban design and city planning is important to remember as we move forward, looking ahead. And so, thank you for all that you've done, and to your team at Olson. So this is a perfect segue to our featured presentation in Gunnar Hand, who is the Director of Planning and Urban Design for the Unified Government of Wyandotte County in Kansas City, Kansas. Gunnar is a passionate community organizer who cultivated his interest in the built environment from a young age and has spent his life transforming it into action and positive change. Gunnar today will provide insight into how the UG approaches planning and the gondola concept. It will be a wonderful example of that, from KCK to KCMO. From leading an international city design practice and founding a transit advocacy nonprofit to promoting clean energy alternatives and neighborhood empowerment on various boards, Gunnar is a problem solver. As a city planner and urban designer, he understands that functional, integrated, and equitable communities can foster a higher quality of life for all people. Gunnar seeks to facilitate, create, and design places that have a positive and regenerative impact on society and the world. And we're really excited to hear from you today. So Gunnar, thank you, and take it away.
Thank you for the introduction, Mr. Myers. Can everybody see my screen and hear my voice?
You're good.
Okay, thank you. I did want to just quickly pivot or qualify the presentation here today. Is I will give you technically two presentations I'm going to cram together. So I am going to get to the idea of the aerial lift that we've been working on at the unified government for the last year plus, maybe. But by way of doing that, I need to introduce you to another project we're doing, which is our countywide mobility strategy, something that we're calling GODOT. So again, my name is Gunnar Hand. I'm the Director of Planning and Urban Design for the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time today over your lunch period. I really do appreciate it. GODOT is our countywide mobility strategy. It was a Planning Sustainable Places grant that we received from the Mid-America Regional Council. And it is a truly countywide with all of our incorporated cities. So not just the UG, but also the cities of Bonner Springs, Edwardsville, and the city of Lake Quivira. We are in the middle of this planning process. So you're only going to see sort of the research we've done thus far. I wanted to kind of point to some of the insights we've developed from our foundations report and how that is carrying in and developing a conversation in our phase 2, which we're just sort of getting started in right now. And again, this will lead me into the aerial lift. But until then, I would encourage everybody to go to www.godot.com. I did put it in the chat. You can find all the information about GODOT on this process on that website, including a full, including the PDF of this presentation. So some of you guys know what planning is, or city planning at least, and you kind of understand that we talk about a bunch of stuff comprehensively. Planners like to be in all things at all times. And similarly, our countywide mobility strategy, if you can believe it, Wyandotte County has never had a comprehensive, collective, collaborative conversation about our transportation futures. So we got quite a big lift to work with, again, all of our incorporated cities and all of our community partners, and again, all of our neighbors as well, because we know that transportation networks do not end in political boundaries. So one of the important sort of focuses of this planning process when we really started to get into it is sort of trying to define what sort of rethink our connection to Kansas City, Missouri. And I'll try to focus this first part of the presentation on that concept and idea. So we have citywide master plans, we have area plans, we have corridor plans. Each of those sort of touch on transportation. But because we have basically a baker's dozen of plans that talk about transportation, let's be honest, a lot of that stuff gets left on the shelf and it's hard to manage. So the GODOT process is consolidating, folding in, and integrating all of our transportation policy into a single document. Part of the research we've done is scouring all of our incorporated cities and all of our past planning projects and bringing them into the fold. Now, I mentioned that Mark provided us a PSP grant for this project. We also were awarded 2 other PSP projects. Those 2 are happening in parallel to this planning process as well, and they will also be folded into this larger mobility plan. That is the Northeast Kansas City, Kansas Heritage Trail, which is currently ongoing, as well as the Merriam Lane portion of what is our Southwest Boulevard Merriam Lane corridor plan, which we're doing in collaboration with the cities of Mission, Merriam, and Overland Park. Oh, sorry. So when we started doing our initial analysis, we obviously wanted to do it within the lens of some level of community value. And because this is such a big project and such a large public engagement effort to have these conversations really for the first time in Wyandotte County, we started with what were already our identified priorities by a board of commissioners, because at the end of the day, the cities of Edwardsville, Bonner Springs, and the city of Lake Quivira are also represented by our board of commissioners. We vetted this with those incorporated cities. We verified it with with a couple of our last surveys, and we continue to verify it as we move through the engagement process. So here we are. We are a part of this region, and as a part of this region, some of you may or may not know this, we are generally more disadvantaged and more diverse than others. And because of that, it carries certain implications, connotations about behavioral travel patterns, as well as access to opportunity. So I'm going to go over a couple of our insights. This is some, not all of the insights we developed from our foundations report. Again, you can go to godot.com to see not just this presentation, but also the full foundations report. It's about 17, 18 pages, but it's very illustrative. It's mostly maps and graphs and highlights, so you can read through it pretty quickly. I encourage you guys to do so. First and foremost, for the last 60 plus years, and for all the planners on the call, you guys already know most of this. But for the last 60 plus years, last couple of generations, we, unified government, Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Missouri, and Kansas City, Kansas, states, as well as the United States, have been building an automobile-oriented society. And that reliance on the automobile does have significant social, environmental, health, and economic impacts. So while we've been building this automobile-centric society, we have not been building a balanced transportation system. So that looks like a bunch of different stuff in a bunch of different regions, but in Wyandotte County, it looks a little bit like this map, which is an extremely fragmented alternative transportation system. This fragmented system makes it especially unsafe, especially dangerous for pedestrians. Now, this is starting to change a little bit, but most transit agencies across the country, and again, it's changing in KCMO, we're sort of rethinking whether we need to have this conversation here in Wyandotte County, but most transit agencies have historically, traditionally focused on coverage and not convenience. And so in Wyandotte County, we have 30, 60, 90-minute wait times, lead times for a bus. On our most sort of heavily used transit corridor, State Avenue. Now, if you're not transit dependent, you are not going to elect to take public transit if that's the kind of convenience that we offer currently. So here in Wyandotte County, we work hand in hand with the Kansas City Area Transportation Authority, but we also run our own transit agency. So we are going to have a conversation about how we deliver that transit service to our community. This is my favorite map of the presentation. For those of you who know what this is, it is a volume to capacity ratio. And what you see on that map is a bunch of green. There's a couple of red spots, there's a few yellow spots, but generally speaking, what this says is there is no traffic in Wyandotte County. There is no congestion. Now, I get that's subjective. I've spent 8 of the last 16 years in Los Angeles, so I know that I'm biased when I come back home to Kansas City and drive around and realize that there is the difference there. But at the end of the day, our roads are built to meet the demand currently and into the immediate future. Now, this raises 2 really important questions. Now, like some of you, like Kansas City, Missouri, excuse me, I think, but in Kansas City, Kansas, we can't afford to maintain our existing roadway system. So when we look at this data, we start to dive in and we ask 2 very important questions. 1, are some of these roads overbuilt? Are there lane miles we can pull out of the system because we just don't need them? And 2, specifically, if you look at all the freeways, it's virtually all green, no red. So if we don't have traffic on our freeways in Wyandotte County, then why are we spending a vast majority of our federal transportation dollars on freeway expansion? You could ask and look, for instance, on the far right corner, bottom right corner of this map where it says Rosedale, that big red line is Rainbow Boulevard from I-35 South to one of our largest employment centers, KU Medicine, right? Is that the more strategic place to be investing our mobility dollars? Or perhaps would it be more equitable to think about investing in that entire 7th Street Rainbow corridor from top to bottom of Wyandotte County? Again, generalizing here, but your typical Clover Lane intersection in an interstate freeway is about $250 million. That can go a long way on an entire multimodal corridor if we chose to. So I think, again, a serious conversation about how we're investing our transportation dollars is really important, not just in Wyandotte County, but I think everywhere. This is not a unique situation for most metropolitan areas in the United States. Next, I wanted to quickly go over these 3 maps. Now, we're in the process of sort of going through our own mapping. Well, our consultant for this project, Kimberly Horn, has a proprietary mapping exercise. Like every consultant nowadays has a proprietary mapping exercise, but basically you take these 3 maps, you put them together, and what you find is our most disadvantaged communities are also our most diverse communities, which are also our most transit dependent communities. Now in Wyandotte County, that points us to what we usually say is east of 635, historic Kansas City, Kansas. But even more than that, it's the northeast area of Kansas City, Kansas in particular. The area I mentioned earlier, we're also going through a heritage trail planning process right now as well. So the question here then becomes, is this the area where we should focus our mobility investments? part of that proprietary mapping exercise I mentioned from our consultant looked at a couple different modes of transit. And if you have a car in Wyandotte County, you can get anywhere in the region pretty quickly. But if you don't have a car in Wyandotte County, you are stranded and left for and really have problems accessing basic services. Now, again, this is not unique to necessarily just Wyandotte County. I think a lot of people deal with this, and there's some debate on whether this is necessarily good or bad within a region. But Wyandotte County has a jobs housing imbalance. Now, when we dug into that data a little bit more, it brought something more important to light here, which is we export low-wage workers to the region, and we import high-wage workers to the region. Now, for me at least, that raises the question of what is the right metric to determine economic success? Because jobs alone doesn't seem to be getting it if we're building jobs for people who don't live in our community. Now, granted, again, the jobs housing imbalance is a much more complex, diverse situation, but it does have travel pattern impacts. And on this slide, I think this just points to sort of the idea of the multiple benefit of our public rights of way. So in the unified government, we are trying to change the narrative about public rights of way. We see them as our most valuable our most valuable open spaces. And if we start to think about them as a diversity of opportunity, it's a stormwater mechanism. Just like Kansas City, Missouri, we just recently signed a consent decree with the EPA, and we have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars fixing our combined sewers. Most of our stormwater infrastructure is in the public right of way. A lot of our other infrastructure is in the public right of way. These are the places where we do our commerce. These are the places where we live and move. And yes, so when we talk about sort of the last 60 years and what that inertia is, we've been building streets to move cars as fast as possible, not people. So if we focus on people instead of automobiles, I think we can start to deliver a multi-benefit opportunity with our public rights of way as we look at each corridor that we plan, design, operate, and maintain, not as an engineering problem with a single engineering solution, but something with multi-benefits. This also has great opportunity when it comes to funding, because we can draw multiple funding streams into a single project if we start looking at it comprehensively. How about that line from a planner? So the time is now. I think we all kind of heard this. The president's here today. The infrastructure bill got passed. I mentioned the consent decree. We have what's called WIFIA loan dollars in hand that we have to do some tweaking and figure out. We still have a bunch of our ARPA money in Wyandotte County. But between all of these things, I think a conversation about our transportation priorities is critically important as we move forward with this plan. And the way that the infrastructure bill, or I should say when the infrastructure bill got paid, and what we understand about the infrastructure bill thus far, that it'll primarily focus on funding existing programs. By the time we finish this planning project in the spring-ish, is about the same time a lot of those funding opportunities are going to come online. So our mantra here in Wyandotte County is buy into GoDOT right now as a city, community, other stakeholders, because it will define what our projects will be in Wyandotte County moving forward. Because we know that the federal government wants us to think multi-jurisdictionally. We know that the federal government wants us to bring in others, not just focus on transportation, the multiple benefit that I just mentioned. And so we are going to have somewhat serendipitously a planning document that's going to define what our top priorities are, and right when a bunch of money is going to come down the pike and we're going to go after a bunch of stuff. So we're in the process of communicating with all of our neighbors, as I mentioned before, again, because transportation networks don't end at political boundaries, which brings us to, and I'm going to skip through these a little bit, which brings us to the aerial lift. So give me 1 second while I switch PDFs here. Again, I would encourage everybody to go to godot.com. This one. All right, can everybody see this PDF now? It should say Connect Kansas City.
It's good, yes.
Thank you very much. So this is not a presentation like the last slide deck was. This is a true PDF. Again, I can share it with everybody after the call today. So it's not going to look like a presentation as I flip through it. So just bear with me as I kind of try to explain. So when we were going through the process of applying for the grants to for the Planning Sustainable Places grants, we were thinking about this mobility plan, and we started thinking about generally mobility across the unified government. And what we started to recognize was we need to do a better job strengthening our connection to the reason we exist as a community, which is Kansas City, Missouri. And so these historical connections, there used to be a couple of streetcar lines. It was much more integrated. A lot of the city used to be down on the West Bottoms before a series of floods, as we all know the history there. But those connections have eroded over time, right? I mean, it's always sort of been an industrial area, but those industrial parcels have gotten larger. Those streetcars have been removed. We introduced the viaduct, which is our primary connection between Kansas City, Kansas and Kansas City, Missouri, or at least our two downtowns. But it left a lot of stuff in between, right? So if you look at it regionally, we have two of our most complete, comprehensive, and extensive pedestrian networks sitting right next to each other, and they're not connected. Well, they're connected, but they're connected by a freeway, right? Now you can walk around, and there is a riverfront heritage trail. I'm not denying any of that kind of stuff, but for all intents and purposes, the West Bottom separates downtown Kansas City, Kansas from downtown Kansas City, Missouri. It's not the only thing that separates the two. So you look at the other situations, we're about 2 miles apart, right? We have a serious elevation change. We go from a bluff to the bottoms, back up another bluff, and we have to cross a huge geographic barrier. We got to cross a river. Now, in another lifetime, I used to work for a firm called BNIM, which did the Next Rail KC expansion plan. And we studied one of these corridors. It was 12th Street. And in that process, we determined, in addition to some of the research that we did in North Rail KC to the potential spur to North Rail, to North Kansas City, what we found is, at least the way we are currently trying to fund streetcar in Kansas City, Missouri, it's really hard to get over that hump. It's really hard to make the numbers work when you have large industrial parcels and not sort of the more fine-grained parcels like you have in downtown and midtown, right? But when you take all those issues combined and look at it, the mode that seems to work the best is an aerial lift. That mode just so happens to be half the cost of, let's say, a streetcar. So there's many opportunities, and I think it's really important to think about this. We've basically created a thought piece here. This is not, I repeat, not a feasibility study. This is us just trying to get our thoughts down on paper, and we were able to use some consultants who were willing to do that with us in this exercise. And so when you look at the benefits, there's a bunch of them, but there's really sort of two that I want to kind of highlight here. And one is the primary connectivity between the two pedestrian grids, as I mentioned before. But the other one is another one that's really important. Rents in downtown Kansas City, Missouri are pretty high. I mean, some of them are Chicago rates. There is a attainable housing or affordable housing issue across our region, and it's growing, right? I think there is still some level of affordability, but in hypersensitive places like in downtown, the prices keep going up and up. 2 miles away, you have some of the most affordable housing in the entire region. So an aerial lift would not only benefit Kansas City, Kansas by creating a direct pedestrian link to the largest job center in the region, but it would also open up all types of affordable housing to people who work in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Now, people think I'm crazy when I start talking about gondolas, because for those of you who have been here for long enough, you might remember a guy named Clay Chastain who talked about gondolas all the time, and others who thought gondolas should go down Main Street instead of streetcar. Now that's crazy. But again, when you look at the very unique situation that's dividing our two downtowns, there is a mode that works to close that gap for us. And it's a mode that's used elsewhere across the world, and we have examples thereof. Now, again, this is not a feasibility study, but we all know how people like lines on a map to help them conceptualize what we're talking about. And we had the added benefit of both HRNA, a fairly renowned national economic development consultant, as well as SOM, an internationally renowned design firm, really help guide us through our thinking. And one of the pieces of advice that they mentioned was, if you can, with an aerial lift, you should probably still keep it within the right of way, because dealing with air rights gets really, really messy. It makes people really nervous because nobody wants to sort of impinge potential development of their property if there's, say, a gondola going over it. So we picked 9th Street, right? We thought, when it seems like there's some applicability here if we went from, say, Case Park to St. John's Park on the Kansas City, Kansas side, using the 9th Street alignment and then taking a right turn at James. The other real benefit of an aerial lift is it's incredibly flexible, right? You can add cars if you need them. You can take cars off if you don't. And the way that they move through the system on the lines, you can actually create different termini. So it's not to say that this has to be the line, but there could also be other spurs. And the greater downtown area plan that just got, that I believe just got adopted, there is a line on a map in that plan that talks about a gondola to Kemper Arena, Hy-Vee Arena. I'm dating myself. So there's an opportunity here for this thing to do a bunch of different stuff. There used to be an old streetcar that went up Central Avenue. I know that when I talk about this, folks, in our neighborhood, a lot of people in the south of our downtown want it to go up Central Avenue as well. Again, there's a bunch of different destinations that could potentially be hit here. And again, I've mentioned that it's half the cost of a streetcar. It's about $25 million a mile. Streetcars on average are roughly $50 million a mile. And yes, that happens all over the world, but there are quite a bit of projects starting to percolate right now in the United States. The one that I think that has the best, two actually that I think have been most in the media, is the idea that's floating around in Chicago, which you can see right here. And then there's another one that's not on the map. Right now, the city of Los Angeles is trying to build a gondola from its downtown up to Dodger Stadium, which again is roughly going to be a mile and a half. So within what we're talking about here. So everybody likes a pretty picture. I won't go through the rest of this presentation other than to show you my two favorite slides here. So this is 9th Street looking east to Kansas City, Missouri, and a rendering just to get people's imagination going. This is not just a transportation mode. This is also a transit-oriented development opportunity. And with all the activity that's going on in the West Bottoms on the Missouri side, we think that this could enhance and really propel that development. For us on the Kansas side, and yes, there is a Kansas side of the historic West Bottoms, we are currently in the process. We just adopted our Armourdale Area Master Plan, which completely reimagines the Kansas River. We are in the process of raising the levees along the Kansas River and then adding about $10+ million of levee betterments on top of them, trails, outdoor spaces. Mr. Porter can talk more about that a little bit later. We're working with HNTB on that one. But again, reimagining the Kansas River as a different, not necessarily just industrial riverfront, and this is the type of public investment that could further attract private dollars. A couple other things. This is my favorite. Nice little cross section so you get to get a sense of what we're talking about. It would go down, out, hopefully, of the flight path and across. And at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of stuff here. I personally, professionally think it's a good idea, but all the UG is asking at this moment is we believe this idea warrants further study. In the words of President Biden, it might be shovel worthy. It's definitely not shovel ready. And with that, I'll conclude my presentation. I really appreciate everybody's time today. Happy to take any questions. If you guys have any data for me for GODOT, please let me know. Any other ideas, all modes are on the table right now in Wyandotte County.
Gunnar, thank you so much. That was really incredible, and I love the history lesson that went along with that, and also the notion that this is a thought piece, and that the best ideas always come from just coming up with great ideas and exploring it. And clearly that's what you're all doing in a very, very comprehensive fashion. We do have some questions that have come in, so I'm going to just kind of scroll through and I can read them, or I can even just ask the folks who put them in here if they'd like to ask themselves. Cynthia, do you want to ask your question about funding?
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, great. I guess going back to Trent, and answering offline, will all your projects and bids, well, I'm sorry, Gurner, will your projects and bids go through the KCATA because you're associated with them, or will it go through Kansas City, Missouri's plan room? Where will the bids show up?
I'll say this. This is definitely a bi-state project. It definitely has the support on our side of things. We are working through the idea with the city of Kansas City, Missouri currently at a bunch of different levels. But at the end of the day, I think conceptually, for me at least, this makes most sense to be a Ride KC gondola.
Okay, so will there be
KCK.
participation requirements? Will your bid show up on the ATA's bid website?
There is no bid. This is not a project. This is just an idea.
Okay.
So I think what we need to do next, it is currently proposed to be added as an unfunded project to the Mid-America Regional Council's long-range transportation plan. If it gets on that list after the review that it's in right now, we're going to pursue feasibility study. And I think that will probably go through the KCATA, if I'm a betting man.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Another question that has come in from Alana Sucharski is, you kind of address this, I think, in terms of going through the idea of different concepts, but tell us about other modes that may have been considered, and Alana refers specifically to a ferry as a potential mode of connection.
So there's a couple of projects right now. Again, in the media, some of you may have seen Mr. Zeller's on the call right now. There's the Flying Truss project, the old Rock Island Bridge. That's going to be our connection across the river. There is currently a connection underneath I-70 eastbound for the Riverfront Heritage Trail. Again, we're extending, in essence, the Riverfront Heritage Trail down to the Flying Truss and making that connection. And then we can hope to continue building levee trails around what's called the Oxbow of the Kansas. It kind of goes around the Armourdale neighborhood and ends back up near the Procter & Gamble plant. So our intent is to fully design all the way to the Procter & Gamble plant, which is, well, it's Kansas River on one side, or Kansas Avenue on one side. It happens to be Kansas Avenue on the other side as well because of that Oxbow. So in those projects, there are a couple of conversations about more recreational type ferries. Part of our levee raise, we have to reintroduce the KC Boat Club's boat dock for the kayaking that they do there. I think that the Flying Truss, just by creating that as a destination, will gravitate people to the river, and we can open up, again, additional recreational opportunities here. But as a transportation mode, I think we have not discussed necessarily a ferry across the river. I will say, though, that part of the Northeast Kansas City, Kansas Heritage Trail project that we're going through right now, the idea is to connect Caw Point to the Quindaro town site. And historically, the Underground Railroad crossed the Missouri River essentially from Parkville to Quindaro town site, and then Quindaro town site was sort of up the bluff that way. So we have had a conversation in the Northeast Kansas is, do we need to create a ferry to Parkville to recreate that experience, if you will, as a part of the work that we're doing around making the Quindaro town site more than what it is right now, which is basically an archaeological site. So no, not ferry specifically, but that's a great idea, and we can definitely talk about that more.
Very good. Kim asked a question, and as somebody who has an irrational fear of heights, it makes my palms sweat to actually read this. Are gondolas able to withstand the Midwest weather that we have here? High winds, thunderstorms, tornadoes, etc. Thanks, Kim.
Have you ever been to Breckenridge on a ski lift 10,000 feet above the sea level during a storm? It's scary, but they work. So yeah, I think we can do that. And again, not everything is a gondola, but all of those things are aerial lifts. If I go back to my, so there's a bunch of different versions of it, right? I don't know without a feasibility study what it's going to look like, if it's going to be sort of the 4 to 5 person cars, or if it's going to be more like what's at Roosevelt Island, which just goes back and forth from Manhattan. That big cable car right there. It could, we're not exactly sure what it is quite yet. But yeah, no, they're designed to withstand all that.
And here in Kansas City, we like to compare ourselves with peer cities. And, this is an impressive array of examples of other cities here and around the world that have employed this type of transportation. Portland maybe is the closest to being a peer city, but are there examples of existing systems in comparable cities, or is it being talked about anywhere else for that?
I mentioned Los Angeles and Chicago are in the process of having these conversations right now, but from our research, no, those were the closest ones within the United States. But again, I think probably the most comparable in terms of geography and topographical change is probably the East River Skyway, which is another SOM project that they're working on right now. So that's just crossing one large river as opposed to like a bottoms and a river, but the East River Skyway, I don't know if you guys, well, for those of you who don't know, Manhattan Island in New York City is surrounded by Hudson River on the west and the East River on the east. And the East River, when you cross it, will go from Manhattan to Brooklyn.
Very good. Rick Usher asked a question, and maybe you answered it, but Rick, I'll just go ahead, and if you want to maybe elaborate on your question, we're here in the West Bottoms, we're between two bluffs, the confluence of two rivers, and then we've also got an airport there. So Rick, if you'd like to expand on your question, I'll open that up.
Yeah, and Gunnar did answer it in the chat a bit, but there is the challenge of the Wheeler Downtown Airport. You know, this is on the approach. I'm thinking sometime, maybe some of you will remember this, back in the 80s or 90s, there was a small jet that did an emergency landing somewhere in the West Bottoms. Like it had a parachute and it landed in a parking lot down there. But I think it's a cool project to consider. I had a similar idea, maybe we could collaborate on to connect Crown Center to Children's Mercy Hospital, Hospital Hill campus with a Roosevelt Island type gondola lifting off in front of Union Station. A short run, but
there's always the vernacular too.
Yeah, right. Well, there's some other challenges. I like the idea of getting up in the air. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, and I think that's really, you know, when we initially started, again, the conversation started as how do we strengthen the connections between KCK and KCMO? We live and die here in KCK based on Kansas City, Missouri, right? It's the reason we're here. And so historically. And so I think that for us, when it got to the point where we started talking about aerial lifts, there was this sort of story that started to develop, which is if you're at a conference in downtown Kansas City, Missouri, and you can walk 2 or 3 blocks to get on a gondola and get those views and get that perspective, it is a destination in and of itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we all know that the downtown Kansas City streetcar starter line has streetcar tourists that come in from all the regions just to ride streetcars. So we think that that has the same type of potential, but this isn't just touristy frou-frou, right? This is also a real transit, commuter, and accessibility issue that I think we can solve between the two as well. Not just between the two, but for the West Bottoms as well, which is also in a lot of ways disconnected from downtown Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah. So Gunnar, I don't know if everyone on the call is old enough to remember your touristy frou-frou reference, but yeah, well taken. I think you're exactly right. This would be a really, I think, increase activity between the two cities, and similar to the way the streetcar did. It's a pedestrian accelerator and economic development engine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I'm going to be completely honest and show my cards here. I was born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri. Hell, I was born in Wyandotte County at KU Med Center. My dad grew up in Wyandotte County. And if you talk to anybody in Wyandotte County, you always have to claim your residency in Wyandotte County before they will listen to you about certain issues. So I just making that clear. But I grew up in Brookside, right? And my dad told me not to go to Wyandotte County. So like a good boy, I did not go to Wyandotte County. When I first started applying for this job and looking and driving around Wyandotte County, it blew my mind. It's a place that I don't think many people in our region have truly experienced. It's a really cool place, right? So in our heads, we're thinking, okay, I'm a tourist or I'm at a convention and I go, I'm gonna go take the gondola. I'm gonna take it over to St. John's Park and I'm gonna get out and I'm gonna look up and I go, wow, this is a really interesting neighborhood. Look at all these really cool old churches. Let's go up that hill and see what's going on. you get to the top of the hill and you look down and you go, wait a minute, there's a downtown in Kansas, in Kansas City, Kansas? Who would have known? It's a huge economic development opportunity for everybody, but really for our case, for our downtown. And you know, we're like a tier 3 to your tier 2 city, right? We're just getting in the game of downtown renaissance, and we're trying to figure out what that is. And we need an impetus. There is currently very little impetus, other than development in downtown Kansas City, Missouri is really expensive. And we're starting to see some of that happen right now. But to propel that into a true renaissance, we got to make I think we have to make an investment. People say, well, why don't you just make a street? Why don't you just extend the streetcar? I think KCK should have its own streetcar connected to your streetcar by a gondola.
Very good. Thank you, Gunnar. There's a few more questions here, so I'm going to maybe just ask folks to ask them, since I don't want to run out of time here. Chrissy, Chrissy Dastrup, you asked a question and have a comment. It looks like I'll just ask you to go ahead and, if you would, on mic and ask Gunnar direct.
Okay, well, yes, hopefully my symphony of dogs and children will not interrupt this. But I mean, I realize that this is, very much in the idea and planning stage. But, I think some of the other projects that they're proposing for Build Back Better funds are not as far along as maybe, you would think they would be. Is there any chance that, we could get some additional momentum behind this if this is a project that, that could be pitched in Kansas or Missouri or both, that could be considered for any of that funding, since it's a transportation related project?
Absolutely. I think that we can pursue all kinds of federal funds for the planning, engineering, and design of the system. And I think that's obviously post feasibility study, that's sort of next step. I don't think, well, we might be able to get some feasibility study money in there if we really want to, but I think your point is well taken. We need political will. And to do that, especially in a bi-state situation, it can't just be me talking about a gondola. I think strongly that the business community, if they were to get behind it, we would create all kinds of political will to move the idea forward and really just test to see if we can even do it. It doesn't need to be on 9th Street. It could go to Hy-Vee Arena instead. There could be a bunch of different scenarios here. Let me go to my map and just, because it brings up one point, Ms. Dastrup. So if you look at this map, there's 4 dots, right? Those 4 dots are just generally stops that we thought it could be. The one dot right on the dash line, which is state line, is right where 9th Street hits James and has to turn.
Okay.
The mechanics of the actual cables and all this other kind of stuff, when you do that turn, it can actually, a gondola can turn 2 ways, right? So you could have a Y somewhere in this line and have 2 termini. That's the type of flexibility a gondola has that no other mode has.
Yeah.
It makes it a little more complicated, but again, I think that it's those types of conversations where we start to connect what people think are the right facilities that need that connection. It doesn't necessarily need to be Case Park for St. John's Park. It was just an easy kind of like point to point to get the ball rolling type of thing.
Right. And, I'm looking at the convention center right here, and, a huge proponent for getting the streetcar extension down to UMKC was, we can create easy access for the people who are coming in for conventions. And then we had a lot of other fans and people behind us because they saw the value in that, not only as a selling point to come to our cool city for your convention, but also an access and spreading that money around to, the plaza. And in this case, to downtown KCK. And what is really neat about KCK is there is so much authenticity down there that you can't build it and buy it. It exists and you have to preserve it. And so I think that those are the kinds of things that people really seek out when they visit the city. They want to know what's the most authentic thing we have. And that's what people like when they travel. And so I think that this is just such a great idea. I'm so supportive of it, and, consider me a resource. I also mentioned that, there is some talk about a gondola going from the new women's soccer complex down to the East Bottoms. And, maybe that could be a group that, strength in numbers kind of a thing.
Sure.
And that one I think will be an easier project. But from what I understand that they've talked about, this is a very monetarily efficient way to create public transit. I mean, these are all over Asia, because of the landscape and the topography, but I mean, this is just such a great idea. I'm so glad that you guys are thinking, big like this. I love it. And creatively, I think it's fantastic. So any way I can help, please let me know.
Thank you. Definitely take you up on that.
Thank you, Chrissy. That was great. Marcia, I'm going to assume maybe but your question was about tying to the streetcar and access points in the West Bottoms. I think that was just covered here in this conversation and looking at the map. And I'll add also, when you talked about going to the East Bottoms, it would be really cool if that could go from the Women's Soccer Stadium to the Rieger Distillery. I think that would be ideal. There's one more question.
Oh, it's all about knuckleheads, Stan. Knuckleheads.
Well, one and the same to me, so I like that.
As long as they can fix you getting stuck at that train track and not being able to cross it. I mean, if you've ever been stuck at that train, you all of a sudden are sold that we need to figure that out.
Well, and it maybe actually there's 2 points that you just jarred my memory here a little bit, Ms. Dastrup, is about a decade ago, a lot of people were talking about subterranean transportation was dead. It just costs way too much to build subway nowadays. Now, granted, a lot of people are still going full bore on that, and surface transportation is an issue. But again, we can rise above literally all of those issues and just fly right over. And going back to the point about the authenticity of downtown Kansas City, Kansas, we still have $50,000 homes with $1 million view, guys. So I highly encourage everybody to take a little look at Strawberry Hill in our central area and see what's going on over there.
Very good. Derek Hetmer, I'll let you have the last word, or at least offer the last question here. If it wasn't already answered, I'll just turn it over to you. If you're still on.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. I'll be quick. Gunnar, thanks for the presentation. And I fully kind of endorse this idea. When I lived in Portland, my wife was lucky enough to ride the tram every day to work. So it's a fantastic idea. It does work in urban conditions, I will say. My question, I think you kind of touched on, I think obviously there was some thinking about the alignment of this kind of proposal. And I was just kind of curious, like you said, it can move, the station points can move, but obviously there was some thinking and maybe there's some logistical challenges of changing the orientation multiple times along the track. But I was just hoping you could speak to a little bit more, expand on the thinking of how it lands in Case Park or the 9th Street alignment, and maybe the thinking if there's future transportation networks that you might tie into to the greater downtown. Was there kind of some backup on that kind of process and that decision?
Sure. The reason why we picked Case Park and St. John's Park is it was easy, right? So they are at the cliffs, and we understand that maybe those aren't the best sited locations for the termini, because it would require some sort of walk shed, if you will, to get into that system. It's not a true transfer, if you will, from another transit mode, because there's no bus about a block away, there's a bus that goes by the St. John's. And then on the Missouri side, I think you got to walk 3 or 4 blocks to even get to Broadway, where there's actually, I don't think there are buses on Broadway. At least they turn on 12th. Again, I can't remember exactly, but yeah, I think to that point, and maybe even to Mr. Usher's point, we could find out that 9th Street alignment wouldn't work because of the flight path, right? Maybe we got to bring it back to 12th. And if we bring it back to 12th, that does create sort of a more seamless connection where it could make sense to get to a place like, I don't know, Barney Alice Plaza, right? And that it could sort of divert and go 2 directions, one to downtown Kansas City, Kansas, the other one to Hy-Vee Arena or something like that. So there's just an iteration of ideas and alignments that we have to study, just like we're studying current alignments right now between Truman Sports Complex and KU Med Center, right? You got to go through those steps. This is just to put the idea there and really to spark the imagination of everybody to think about our core problem in Kansas City, Kansas, is we don't feel like we are sufficiently connected to Kansas City, Missouri, and we will live and die by that connectivity.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue a lot. I mean, all downtowns went through a cycle, right? But I think one of the reasons that we continue to suffer, one of the reasons we continue to struggle with our renaissance is we're not connected to Kansas City, Missouri in a way that we should be. Again, unless you have a car, and not everybody has a car. And a lot of people don't want to have cars anymore, right? It's not just a matter of that. And if you can't even provide the option, it makes it very difficult. So we think that this could expand opportunity. We think it could expand bike pedestrian connectivity. We think that it could expand economic development across the whole corridor. So again, we believe it warrants further study so that we can address all of these questions.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to end our program. You know, we've talked a lot here in recent years about, you know, north-south streetcar and transit and the economic development that is spurred from that. And so now the idea, of course, is we're going further to the south, but we got to talk about those east-west connections. And I think it's important that when we talk about east-west, that's not just, you know, east Kansas City, Missouri, but west crossing the river, Kansas City, Kansas, to the point you've made. Gunnar, thank you so much for a wonderful and insightful program today. Thank you, Olson. Thank you, Greenworks. We'll be back January 12th. We're still dotting the I's and crossing some T's in terms of format, venue, all that stuff. So I'm going to not make the mistake I made last month and get a little ahead of myself. But please stay tuned, social media and website. And I'm just very excited about kicking off 2022. And our featured speaker will be City Manager Brian Platt, Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a great holiday season, and we'll see you all soon.